Scott, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. To start, it feels kind of timely that we're doing these interviews quasi close to Judgment Day because it just feels, it's in the air. But when you are making a movie that has robots and or AI drone, whatever you want to call the thing that looks like a human but is really metal, it is it just brings back all of these kind of movies that we used to have in the 80s and that we've continued to kind of go back to. When you're making an original version of that, do you look to movies that people are going to compare this to? Or do you try and make it like oh my God. I knew I was gonna mess up the name when I went to say it. Uh, but when you're making your movie, do you try and make it its own thing, or do you take note of those references that people are gonna make just inherently?
Yeah, definitely. I think, it's interesting in terms of the sci-fi element. We didn't necessarily, I wasn't really watching a whole lot of, I was actually probably more looking for inspiration in those kind of early 2000s thrillers and stuff like that. But when I will say this, when I was watching the dailies for, we have a hospital sequence,
Mhm.
and lights are shutting down and we have a lot of blue light. I was watching this kind of blue light in the hospital, thinking to myself, oh, this is Terminator 2 right now. um so I definitely think, there's certain movies, and Terminator 2 is such an influential film.
Mhm.
It kind of, I was a child when it came out, so it's like one of those like Jurassic Park, these films that are just kind of the bone structure of my love for filmmaking. And so yeah, there are certain films I just couldn't escape. And and I think a lot of that is actually, it's really interesting because when you are working with a concept designer during prep and kind of designing certain damages and certain looks and everything, we really didn't want to use, I didn't want to give him any sort of examples or anything like that. It was kind of like, let's see what you can, come up with. And then we would kind of, spitball ideas and play around with things. Because, that's what's so fun about sci-fi, is that you can be creatively free to try and create something unique. But there are definitely, you always feel like you're in the shadows of these greater, incredible sci-fi masterpieces.
Well, and you mentioned the thrillers, which I recognize the movie I'm about to reference is a 90s movie, but it's fine. It's the same
Mm.
idea. It reminded me of like What Lies Beneath and stories like that, where it's like you have this with everything else going on, it is still about a couple. And so you're on the edge of your seat, you're afraid at times, but it is about a marriage and what kind of is the problem within these two characters. When you have something like that where you add in the element of Megan Fox as a robot, what for you was like the thing that you're like, I want to make sure this comes across in this movie and doesn't get overwhelmed by the sci-fi and the thriller and all of these other aspects?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because when you're reading the script and you're kind of like, all right, at some point, we have a robot and a human kind of having this sexual encounter.
Mhm.
Um, and so you're kind of, there are so many ways to go about it. Um, and I think the biggest thing was, how do we create a performance from Megan that is, robotic and interesting to look at, and sometimes, apathetic and emotionless in certain ways, but is, it has to, there has to be the sexual tension there. It has to kind of work. um when we get into these scenes, that, it can't be too robotic and clunky and all that, otherwise everything can fall apart. So I felt like it was definitely a balancing act in terms of finding the right performance with her, and making sure that when we get to these certain points, the audience not only believes it, but is excited by it, and it was playing with those elements, and it actually kind of inspired me to shoot one of the scenes in a particular way where we kind of bring the wife back into it. I'm trying to give this kind of spoiler free spoiler. of the situation. But we kind of played with that a little bit and wanted to make it feel a little bit more humanistic for the protagonist at that point by bringing the wife back into it. But yeah, that's my spoiler-free spoiler.
Well, and now this part is in the trailer. I double checked before I started this interview, so I can bring up this. Going back to like the robot element of it, when you have a moment in your movie and you get to do the like when her face is like reveals like the machinery essentially, what for you as a creative, like what is that moment like for you? Like, are you just so excited that you get to have that nerdy, like, yeah, there's a robot and I got the show the metal and do the thing that everyone always wants to do with these movies? Or were you like aware that you're like, people are going to be waiting for this moment. If I mess it up, they're going to be so mad at how this looks.
There's definitely that feeling. It is that particular shot as well. We had went through different designs and you're not only battling creative elements. There is, for something, a film of this size, there is a budgetary restriction as well. So you can't, as much as you want to have eyeballs hanging around and a lot of brain, electric brain sparks or something, I don't know. But it was really exciting. We kind of approached it very early on. We kind of started looking at prosthetics for the outer part and then creating visual effects to create this hollowness. And that's what I kept saying to the team, was that I wanted to feel hollow. And so we tried to create that depth as much as possible. But yeah, seeing it up on the screen for the first time, it is exciting. It is. I do find it's hard with visual effects where after a certain time of seeing, you're kind of going through weeks and weeks and weeks of seeing different versions and all that kind of stuff. And at a certain point, your mind kind of melts and you're like, I can't see the differences between version 380 and 382. So it's it's a difficult moment, but it's also, it's very gratifying when you get to the end and you get to a point where people get excited to see that. It was something I didn't really think about, where it was like, we need to be steer clear. I remember there was one version that felt a little Transformers, style. And I was like, we can't have Megan Fox looking too transforming. Like, we need to back away a little bit and try something a bit more different. So, no, but it is exciting. And I do love like sci-fi films are just, I feel like as a filmmaker, are the most exciting things to play with. And we try to keep it as grounded as possible. But part of you is like, oh, wouldn't it be nice just to have a hologram here or something like that?
Let's make it easy. I have a question about the casting, because I do think it's, as a millennial, I don't know if you've seen, there's like a meme where it's like, what like straight men will be like, the most handsome man is Ryan Reynolds, and like every straight man says this one thing. And I have always felt like the straight girl equivalent was Megan Fox, especially for millennials, because I remember being like, I want to look like Megan Fox when I was a kid, and like it has not changed. But it is so interesting for me that in this movie, the little girl is the one like, oh, can we have this robot? Because I was like, yeah, Megan Fox has an appeal where like everyone's like, yeah, I want to be around her. But then you also have Madeline Zima, who I watch The Nanny a lot. And that is like a comforting face to see. And I'm like, when you have these two actresses kind of playing the same idea, but in very different ways, was that something you guys thought of? Or is it just kind of like the luck of the draw that it just happens, especially with millennials, that those two have that appeal to them?
No, I think, well, it's interesting. I didn't think it from a millennial perspective, but you're right. I mean, I grew up watching The Nanny and watching, Megan Fox and everything like that. So it was that is interesting. I would say, yeah, once we kind of knew we had Megan on board, I definitely wanted to kind of juxtapose that with a different kind of face and different, someone. I kind of think of Maddie as like the girl next door, and she's so much more. There's something really innocent about her, and what I thought she actually brought to the table as well was that she softened the husband Nick's character in a certain way. Um, and yeah, and when when we had her, approaching for the role, I was like, how can we not get to fulfill my experience of working with her? And I loved her in Californication as well,
Mhm.
and everything like that. So I had grown up watching her, and when I first saw her, because of the nanny, because of how young she is there and everything, I was like, can she pass as a mother? Like, I was like, how old is she? I just, in like Californication, she's
Mhm.
playing a teenager. So I was kind of like, yeah, Californication only felt like a few years ago. So I was like, is this weird? And then I look, I was like, all right, no, we can have her as the mother here. But interesting kind of side note to all that was, we actually had to cast the child before we could cast the mother and father, Michele and Madeline, because of all the safety protocols and paperwork you kind of need to put through, and we were kind of coming up to production, and so that became a priority. So that was probably the most nerve-wracking element about casting, was that we had to kind of be like, all right, this is our girl, and now we have to find a mother and father that kind of
Backwards.
can match up. But it also was freeing because it wasn't, trying to find a young child actress. Uh it was we could now go, all right, who is the best person for this role, instead of saying who matches the mother and matches the father and who does all this. And then we kind of lucked out. I really feel like Matilda and Madeline look like they
Mhm.
could be mother and daughter. um but yeah.
I love that. One, it's I have a question about like the horror elements of, again, I'm a millennial. I love Jennifer's Body, and so when Megan Fox is in a horror-esque role, I'm like, yay, we're back. But when you get to play with, it's a thriller, so it already kind of has some of those elements in it. When you get to play with the like horror tropes in a sci-fi thriller, what for you is like the most fun thing you got to do with this movie that you were like, I don't know if I can do this, and then you're like, ah, no, I'm doing it.
um there are some certain sequences. There's a bathtub sequence that uh the producers kind of butted heads with me, being like, this is pretty messed up. And I had to really fight it to get it in there. And I will say, yeah, it involves a baby, and I now have a 6-week-old, and I haven't watched the sequence since having my own baby, and I'm nervous to go and watch it again and be like, what is wrong with me? Why did I fight so hard to have this particular sequence in there? But I would say what excites me in terms of sci-fi and horror, particularly this kind of world of Sims, is that you can play with this like superhero like strength.
Mm.
And we have these kind of gory moments, or these elements where she is just showing her strength. And there is a particular scene where we have, she kind of goes to Monty's house, um, and it was like a scene that we had expanded upon, because it was one where we were like, and it's particularly with Jennifer's Body was like a big influence in this, and with knowing um Megan's love for that role, I was kind of like, I think she would really enjoy this scene where we kind of get to see her be a badass, and take someone out who we might not like as much as the other characters of the film. And so we kind of really wanted to have a moment there. And I think Jennifer's Body was always playing in the back of my head with that, which was, we want to see her become this badass character. And I think Megan Fox is really good at playing badass characters like that. And then we take that element, and you kind of are rooting for her in that particular sequence. And then we kind of start to twist it into more of a horror element. We start to kind of take that strength and put it against more innocent characters. And that's where I think the horror comes in. And we really try to ramp up the stakes of the third act in that way, and make Maggie and Isla and Max more vulnerable. But yeah.
Yeah. for my last quick question, it's very quick. I'm calling them metal beings because they all have different names and everything, and it's a lot easier to just call them metal beings. If you had to see her in a movie with another metal being, do you know what in all of film and television and sci-fi history, what being you would want to see your creation go up against?
Oh, this is a great question. Oh, I mean, it'd have to be either the T100 or T1000. Let's say
Okay.
I would say T1000 because you got the liquid metal. That is um visually, yeah. Look, I don't think we would hold up much quick, it'd be a quick battle, but it would be fun to watch.
But if you got M3gan, aka Megan,
Yes.
I call her M3gan. If you got M3gan in with her, like, and the two of them were battling the T100, I feel like they would stand a chance.
that, that would be an interesting crossover. Yeah, that would
Yeah,
I would go watch that for
it'd
sure.
be perfect. Thank you so much for talking with me. I can't wait for everyone to see. Say the name of the movie. I'm not saying it.
Subservience.
Thank
But I've
you.
got an Australian accent. I might be saying it wrong as well, so don't worry.
I just opted out at that point. Nope. But thank you so much for talking with me, and I can't wait for everyone to get to see the movie.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great one.
Bye.